Hello everyone! Today I'm with Kara Dobson, who is a researcher here at KBS. I'm going to ask her about her work and her job as an ecologist. So welcome, Kara.
Thank you.
My first question is, what research project are you working on now?
So right now, I'm working within this system right here, which we are using. These chambers are called open-top chambers, and they passively increase air temperature within the chamber to projected levels of future climate. So the plants within those chambers are experiencing hotter temperatures similar to what they might be experiencing in the future. And within this project, we look at a lot of different things, such as changes in phenology, so how the timing of life cycle events for plants are changing, such as do the plants flower earlier when they're warmer? Do they produce seeds earlier under warmer conditions? And we also look at changes in plant composition, so like how different types of like the abundances and the diversity of plants, how those differ when the plants are warmed. And more specifically for what I'm doing, I'm looking at how plants emissions of chemicals change under warming treatments, because plants are constantly emitting chemicals and they allow the plant to defend itself and communicate to other plants and like potential herbivores or pollinators. And I'm seeing if this warming treatment affects the ability of the plant to emit certain types of these messages and also how much of these chemicals they're able to produce.
Super cool.
Yeah, it's like plant communication, kind of.
Yeah. Can you give an example of one of the chemicals that you look at? Like, what does it do?
Well, right now I don't have too many like concrete results because I haven't been able to take my main sampling yet, but there's been a lot of research that, I haven't done, but like background research other people have done where like the chemicals plants produce are able to attract parasitoids, which kill herbivores. So like if a plant is being eaten by a certain herbivore, it can release these kind of like alarm signals in the air that other insects can pick up on and come and kill those herbivores. So the plant is able to defend itself that way by attracting beneficial insects to it.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm saying if warming treatments may kind of like decouple those interactions, and if warming kind of either enhances or alters the ability of the plant to emit these important chemicals.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So how did you become involved in this research?
So I became involved in this climate change research through my advisor, Phoebe Zarnetsky. And that's kind of the whole reason I came to do research at Michigan State, was because I wanted to be involved with this project. So when I applied, I specifically applied to work under the context of this climate change experiment. So yeah, I just kind of started in it from the beginning of my PhD.
Yeah. Is working with climate change or outside something you always knew you wanted to do, or was that something you discovered?
No, I think it's something I discovered. When I started college, I actually originally wanted to go for graphic design because I really like art, so I kind of started on that path. And I just kind of didn't, like, it didn't feel right for me, so I kind of moved my way through a couple different science fields. I changed my major to psychology, and then I went into environmental science, and then I finally ended up in an ecology major. And it just like really felt right to me. Like when I started doing that major and like taking those classes, it was like this is what I want to do. And I think a good way to know when you found something that you're interested in doing like for your career is when you start looking at it outside of the context of like classes or things you need to do for school. Because I found myself just like for fun looking up papers about like what I'm interested in, and it was like, this is kind of a sign that I should stick with this because I'm looking this up on my own time out of the context of anything else that I need to be doing. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I discovered what I really wanted to look at and like what I wanted to do within science.
That's such great advice. Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people start off not knowing what they wanted to do, but that's
it's really hard to know.
That's interesting to know that you took a few different turns, and that's completely normal.
Yeah, totally normal.
So what is your role in this specific project? Like, for example, what are you doing today in your job?
Yeah, so I am a graduate student, I'm a PhD student, so my day-to-day is really different because some days I'll be out in the field taking specific plant samples, other days I'll be in the lab processing those samples. Today I'm mostly doing data work because we do have some preliminary results coming in from work this summer. So I'm doing a lot of coding and doing some analysis in R we typically use. But I like this working in this system of the LTER because it's always something different every single day, just depending on what the day brings, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite job to do?
Ooh, I do really like the data analysis days working on the computer because I feel like the most exciting part, well, one of the most exciting parts for research for me is like getting those preliminary results. Like when you make your first figure of your data, it's like always so satisfying to see those results for the first time. So I think that's probably my favorite part is working on the computer and getting those preliminary results.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you touched on this a bit earlier, but how does your research relate to climate change?
So I look at how warming and drought affect plant communication. So I talked a bit about these open top chambers that simulate warming, but then we also have this taller structure, which is a rainout shelter. So as the name suggests, they keep the rain out and mimic drought. And so we're looking at both the combination of warming and drought and how it affects multiple different aspects of plants and plant traits. But yeah, I'm mostly my work is looking at plant communication and the chemicals that plants emit.
And the context of this is that Michigan's climate is projected to continue getting warmer and longer periods of drought are predicted to happen, and they already there's a trend that they are. So it's important to do this kind of work so that we can predict and try to adapt to those changes.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the whole point of this experiment is to just see how the plants respond to this factorial, like all drought, all warming, or down there we have only warming, all of those treatment combinations to see, like how you said, how the plants respond and ways that we could help mitigate these responses that the plants have to these different climate change scenarios.
And I know we're in a plot right now that is kind of mimicking a native, or I think it's called a successional habitat, but are you doing any work related more to like agriculture or systems that humans interact with more?
So my work is mainly in these early successional plant communities, but I think it can still be related back to more like applied aspects of like agriculture and other systems, because we do have plant species within these plots that are found in other systems. Like red clover is a really common species in these plots, but it's also a common cover crop for agricultural systems. So I think there's tie-overs between what we find in this system and what you could find in other systems as well.
All right, so I know you're just getting started and you've said you haven't really gotten any final results yet, but what's something you've learned or taken away so far from your experiment that you didn't expect, or something that you found interesting?
Well, I've had the chance to take like preliminary measurements before I take my actual measurements once the plants have been in drought for a little bit. And I've gotten those analyzed just to make sure my methods worked. And I think this is a common theme in science, but it was a lot more work than I had originally planned to, come up with a method, follow it, make sure it works. But I think that's pretty common in science. Things always take longer than you expect them to. But I did have a chance to get those analyzed, and I did get results out of it. So that was pretty exciting that my method worked the first time that I did it, because I really thought that I was going to have to try and change a few things around, but it ended up working out, which was pretty exciting because then I don't have to like spend more time coming up with a new method. So yeah, that was an exciting moment to know that my method works, and I can just go ahead and take my samples when I need to.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Another question I have is, why should someone care about what you're doing here? Maybe even someone who has no connection to agriculture. Why is this important?
I think it's important because, I mean, obviously climate change is going to affect all of us and like all of the ecosystems that we live in. So I think it's important for this type of work, because if nobody's doing this, like how will we know how to mitigate what we might find in the future with how climate change affects ecosystems? Because without research that looks at climate change and finds what we can expect to happen, and without looking at ways to help mitigate what we might find, then it's just kind of, we can't, we won't be able to have as good of a response as we might need to in the future.
Yeah. Do you feel like, and you work specifically with chemicals in plants, do you feel like there's a need to work and understand those systems more compared to other things that people are studying in climate change, or is that pretty studied?
That's a hard question, because it's hard to know what needs to be studied more, because I feel like in any system in science, there's always, like if you work in that system, you're kind of like privy to it, to think like everybody should look at this system because you think it's so cool because you work in it. So I think like if you ask any scientist, they'll think like, yes, everybody should look at like plant soil feedback, or like everybody should look at plant communication because you get so excited about your own work. I mean, I think that we could look at it more, because I think what I look at, people tend to focus more on how herbivory, like insect herbivory or pollination affects plant communication and plant chemical emissions, and people tend to focus less on how these abiotic stressors like warming and drought affect those emissions. So I think combining the two areas of research would create a better picture for what we might expect to find in the future. So I think that's one thing that could be done better, I guess, is kind of melding those two fields of biotic stressors and abiotic stressors effects on plants.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool that you're able to study that. So my last question is, what do you find most rewarding about your job and where you are studying right now?
Yeah, I think what I find most rewarding, I mean, just as being a scientist in general, is there's always more that you could look at, because there's so much that we don't know about like pretty much every system on Earth. So like whether you study plants or whether you study animals or the soil or whatever it is, there's always unknowns. So it's really exciting to be in a field where like I could pursue any avenue of research that I'm interested in, and there's always something interesting I could find. So being able to make new discoveries on something is always really, really exciting to me. And working here at the LTER specifically, I just think it's such a great community of scientists to be able to work alongside with, and everybody's so nice and collaborative that, you know, like if I'm having a question about like soil, there's so many people I could go to, or like a question about like insect herbivores, I could go ask anybody here. And just the opportunities for collaboration and working with other people, I think is just really unique in a LTER system like this one.
Yeah, I found this summer to be really enjoyable to meet everyone and to see how collaborative everyone is in terms of having their own specific specialty, but interacting with other scientists and forming a really nice community.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a really great interview with Kara Dobson, and thank you for your time and for sharing your experiences, and thanks for sharing your research.
Yeah, thank you.